14 years at that point of chasing this dream, find out that this dream is essentially dead in the water, which was a tough pill to swallow.
All right, welcome to Willing to Fail. I'm your host, Peyton Bennett, as usual. And today we got a very special guest. He is the third oldest D1 college football player ever. He was the walk-on kicker for Virginia after serving 10 years in the Marines. So with no further ado, welcome our special guest, Matt Ganyard. How are you?
I'm great. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, dude, your journey is super interesting. I mean, anyone who watched college football last year, I think, saw a glimpse or saw your interview on ESPN. So I'm just curious more of kind of your backstory and how it got to the point that we all saw last year. So we can just start at the beginning since there's no better place. Where are you from? What was your upbringing like, and what are your parents like?
Yeah, so son of a Marine fighter pilot. So the Marine Corps thing was kind of in my blood, although that's not the kind of path I saw, at least initially, going into college. But so kind of grew up all around, born out in the Orange County area, back when there's a base out there. Moved around about 5 times, spent 5 years in South Carolina, spent a few months and then a few more years in the San Diego area, and then a few tours up in the DC area, all before finishing high school back out in San Diego on Coronado Island. So kind of bounce all around, kind of claim whatever area makes sense for the conversation, but loved kind of that dynamic as a kid. Just kept things interesting, but also just really kept the family tight. When you're moving around, can't take your friends with you, but family goes with you. So love them or hate them, you figure out how to get real close with them. And I was very fortunate to love them a lot and spend a lot of great memories with them.
Yeah, that makes sense coming from a Marine family. That's kind of the direction you went and moving around. I know that plays a big role in your development as a kid. But for you, I saw you played soccer like most kickers growing up. Soccer, was soccer always like the sport for you? Was there ever any dabbling in other sports growing up or in high school?
Yeah, so kind of did the normal kid thing, till about 12 years old, playing all the sports. At that point, kind of soccer was the sport I was going to focus in. That was my favorite one, the one I excelled at, and did the whole travel soccer up until about sophomore year in high school. At that point, I realized wasn't quite good enough to play Division I soccer. I didn't want to select a college solely based on where I could play. I loved it, being able to play it all my life, but wanted to go to the school I wanted to go to just for other reasons besides soccer. So played a year of lacrosse in high school, finished out, the high school soccer scene. But at that point it was, enjoy it for what it's worth and find wherever I go play on that club team there and submit me all the time. But besides that was going to be the end of the soccer career.
Yeah, it seemed like you were just living a normal college kid life. I saw like a clip of you at a Virginia game, like with your shirt off, like painted up, screaming. So there obviously is some passion for sports, clearly, and for football too. So when you like a big football fan growing up, or was it just soccer really?
Yeah, always loved watching football. I never played it. My dad, I think, resisted me playing as a kid. Not back then. It wasn't the worry about, concussions and CTE. It was more, concerns of, messing up your knee early on in your childhood and then having that as a nagging injury the rest of your young adult and then adult life. So for me, it was the other sports and just always a huge fan of football. Moving around in the 90s, I was a Cowboys fan. Just that was I didn't have a home team necessarily, so I adopted the team that was always on TV at that point. That was the Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin days. So that was my college, my professional team. Both my parents went to Northwestern, so that wasn't besides the 94, 95 season, that it wasn't a great team to follow. But older brother ended up going to Clemson, so I kind of adopted them, later in middle school and high school as kind of my team to cheer for until I had one of my own.
Okay, so then you go to Virginia. You obviously become a Virginia football fan, so I saw that you tried out for the team as a sophomore. Kind of talk me through that process of having the idea to do it your sophomore year, and then kind of about what that process was like trying out for.
Yeah, absolutely. So after soccer kind of ended my senior season of high school, my dad and brother just offhand said, we're watching guys miss on Saturdays and Sundays. We're like, hey, how far do you think you can kick it? Because they knew I had a pretty strong leg for soccer. So I went out and tried it. And, I think that provided just a fun little thing on the side. I realized I was pretty good at it for having just picked it up, but very raw. And so I didn't have any plans initially to, go after this. I had some nagging injuries from soccer that I needed to let rest. Went to UVA just to be a normal student, but kind of kept this on the side. And so, going through first year, I was doing it more and more and realized that, why not give this a shot? I'd heard crazier stories of guys being brought on as a walk-on. I said, okay, if we're going to make this a go, let's, find some lessons or anything online and really go at it. And so I found a local guy up in the DC area, got one or two very short lessons just to try and fine tune a few things. Watched a lot of YouTube videos back in the day. And this is, the infancy of YouTube. So it's not quite the catalog of videos and access to premium content there is now, but, really just thinking, I should be able to try this, and not really having any background, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, and just kind of cold called and reached out to the special teams coach, who was Anthony Poindexter at the time, who's now at Penn State. Reaching out to their assistants and asking when the open tryout was, because to the best of my knowledge, that's the process to do it. And so, I got the day of the open tryout, went in. No real idea what I was doing besides, I'm going to go kick. I remember at the time it was Al Gross, the coach. He walked by in the reception area, and, I had a little bit of shell shock, like, oh, that's the head coach I've been watching this whole time. And, it just kind of, looking back, it just makes me laugh at, how green I was, for lack of a better term, of, to this whole experience and this whole landscape. Tryout actually went pretty well. I went 9 for 9. Every kick they gave me, I made. They asked me if I punted. I was like, I can punt the ball? Sure, why not? And again, just the lack of experience, I just tried to drill it as high as I could. Was never a punter, never really claimed to be a punter, but they're probably looking at me like, what is this guy doing right now? But on the kicking side, again, it went great. And so little surprised and a little disappointed when, I got a generic email. It was, insert name. Hey, we're sorry to let you know you didn't make the team. No real explanation. If you want to try out, look to try out in the fall. And that was pretty much it. And so kind of stung a little bit. Again, just not really having an explanation of what else I could have done besides make 9 field goals. And so that was at that point, wait another year until the tryout. But the year came around, similar timeline. I went to try out in the spring of junior year, and weirdly enough, I got there and was told by one of the folks that does the compliance that I had used some eligibility that every person gets, a one-time tryout. Essentially, the eligibility center way back then, you get a 45-day period to try out without having to provide all the documentation. I had used that unknowingly last year or the year prior. Nobody had really given me a heads up that I needed to go through this documentation, providing, transcripts and proof of graduation from high school. And so this was the day before the tryout was set. And so essentially I couldn't try out my junior year. I just got blindsided by that news. And at that point we were leading into the senior year of, or my senior year. The tryout opportunities were pretty much up at that point.
Yeah, it's gotta be frustrating. I mean, going 9 for 9 and then not really hearing any details. I can see how that would irk you for sure.
Yeah.
So how far were you kicking in that tryout? Like how much?
I want to say it was, a standard left, middle, right, back to probably, I want to say 50 yards, I think was the max they let me kick. Again, they didn't have me do any kickoffs. Maybe that should have been a side on how much they were really interested in bringing on. I think it would have been a 4th kicker at the time. So looking back, I get it now. Certainly would have liked to have a little more clarity at the point or at that time, but a guy with no experience, a 4th kicker on a roster spot, I get it. But certainly provide a little chip on the shoulder for later on down the road.
Yeah, for sure. So was that trial, was that your first time like putting a helmeted pads on, or did they not put pads on?
No, so funny enough, they didn't put pads on, didn't put a helmet on. My first time putting a helmet on was one day before fall camp about 5 months ago. So, I just never had access to a helmet. Had been told by, former college and pro guys and guys I've trained with, they're like, you'll figure it out, you'll put it on, it'll fit just fine. Don't stress about it. A little bit of condensed visibility, but not a big deal. So when I did get to the go ahead with UVA this past year, that was one of the first things I did. I walked in to the equipment guys. They're like, "Oh, do you want this brand or this brand?" I was like, "What do the kickers wear?" They're like, "This one." They're like, "What visor do you want?" I was like, "Same thing. What do the kickers wear?" I don't know. And so they handed it to me. I was like, "Okay, cool. I got one day before fall practice starts. I'm gonna go out without anybody around me, kind of get the jitters out, putting on this helmet, and we're off to the races from there."
Nice. Yeah, I want to dive into kind of your full immersion experience in that first year, but there's a little bit before we get to that. So you were,
Yeah.
so I guess my perspective would be like, if for you, you're a student, a sophomore, you do this trial, you go 9 for 9, and then you don't get a call, or all you get is an email back. I mean, watching the Virginia football team as a fan the rest of the season, are you just like, any mistake the kicker makes, you're like, I should be there? What was the experience like being a fan after that?
Yeah, there's certainly like, oh, I could have a chance, or why didn't they take a more serious look at me? But at the same time, you're rooting for your team. If it were just some team that you didn't really care about, maybe you root against them. But there was never, oh, I want to see this guy fail and this guy miss a kick so that I feel better about myself.
Okay. So then you just go on, live the normal college life, and then after that, graduate. I saw you for a little bit went into try to work in like the government world, and that didn't seem to really fit you very much. So talk about kind of your process of like deciding what you want to do with your life after you graduated college.
Yeah. So, knew I wanted to serve in some regard. I'd grown up in a family of service with my dad. Didn't think necessarily that's what I wanted to do. I didn't do ROTC at UVA undergrad. And so I looked at the, Capitol Hill intern experience. We got to intern with a representative from San Diego. Great experience, but showed me it was a little bit slower pace than I really wanted right out of the gate. So kind of went back to the drawing board and, revisited the idea of military service. And so had some deeper talks with my dad, that I hadn't necessarily had as a kid of, what's the real experience that maybe you sugarcoated or didn't really give us the inside scoop on what it really was like. And he did this for 28 years. So he was able to give the goods and the bads. And I, talked to my mom as well to see the family perspective on, again, the goods and the bads. And so from there, I realized that, it's something that it was worth pursuing, and kind of went down the path, looked at the Marine Corps first and foremost, decided I wanted to fly if I was going to do this. And that incurs a certain added set of years of commitment. So the standard, you sign a contract and you commission with the Marine Corps, you're in for about 4 years, and then you have the opportunity to get out. They realized a long time ago, kind of all the branches did, that they were losing a lot of men and women to the airlines. They were getting their pilot's license, getting their hours, and then jumping ship and going with the airlines. And so from there, you essentially incurred an 8-year contract after 2 years of flight school. So that's where the math comes in for 10 years. And so making that decision was certainly a bigger one than necessarily maybe, the 4-year contract is. That's a large chunk of your young adult professional career. And so I needed to make sure that it really was something I wanted to do, and ultimately decided to be a great first chapter. And then I could kind of decide from there whether to, follow and make it a career, or step away and start the next chapter. And so was very fortunate to get a slot with the Marine Corps. And after graduation, went up to Quantico, Virginia, and did the 10-week officer candidate course and commissioned with the Marine Corps right after that.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough, big decision at that age, but I can see where, because your dad had lived that life, like having that insight of like what it really is like, I feel like probably helped a lot. So other than just making that big decision and making the big commitment, like, I mean, just as a normal civilian, I just hear the stories of like the training and like read like a David Goggins book. He talks about Hell Week, and I'm like, man, I do like a cold plunge one day, and I'm like, that's tough enough, dude. But so for you, the stuff you can talk about, like what was the most difficult like part of that training, just like from a mental or physical standpoint?
I would say lack of sleep. They are very good, whether it's Marine Corps or otherwise, at breaking you down to build you back up. They've got a very set regiment and how to do that. They take away your individuality, make you part of the team, and then build you back up over that 10 weeks. But they do it in very physically, mentally, emotionally draining ways. It's the way it should be done, but it's not easy in that sense. And I think they technically have to give you, I think it's 8 hours of uninterrupted opportunity to get sleep at night, but you may have a fire watch 1 hour duty at 3 a.m. that you have to wake up for, and there's things you have to get done only at that time with all the lights out, and you've got a little red lamp headlamp on, trying to do stuff in the dark because you're not allowed to turn on the lights, and you're doing all this stuff and prep for the next day, and so you're getting very broken sleep, only to wake up the next morning and immediately get yelled at and do multiple things of physical activity, and then classroom, and then back to it. And over 10 weeks, it's pretty draining. But again, there's a very clear purpose to it. I remember my wife, she was just a girlfriend at the time, but saw me later in the period when we had a chance to go home for 24 hours. She caught me just staring into the fridge, almost just like blank face, just like, you awake in there? And then I think at that point she realized how exhausted I was. But again, very clear purpose and method for the madness, and incredible opportunity to kind of come out the other side as a Marine.
Yeah, I mean, the reward at least is very clear through all that mental struggle and physical struggle, especially because you can physically see it from your dad's side. But
absolutely,
we just out of curiosity, like what percentage of people like that go through that training quit, or the peers that you had quit?
The numbers I'd be guessing at. There are certainly people that show up. I think technically you have to, by signing up for it and committing to it, you're committed to the first 3 weeks. They try and not let you just drop. It's a little bit different on the officer and enlisted side. So I was on the officer side in Quantico. They are willing to let you go. Enlisted side, if they can get you to sign up, they want to keep you around, even if it means kind of molding you for a little bit longer. But I had, folks that entered with me who just, shell shocked the first day, for lack of a better term, and left just 2 days in. I saw people get injured. That was, that's tough to watch somebody, not be able to realize this dream, at least at that point, because of an injury, something kind of out of their control. But I think they do a very good job on preparing folks to come and make it through the course. Not to say it's easy, but, it's an investment for them. They don't want to trade folks. So the recruiters are very good at making sure they are prepped and ready to go.
For you, was there any thought of quitting?
No. Certainly some moments that, the first night or two, you're like, whoa, what am I in for the next 10 weeks? I think everybody can honestly say they've had those moments, but, I was very fortunate. Weird things like, just a letter from, again, my girlfriend at the time, now wife, she was very good at writing letters. So whenever we got mail call, just having something tangible just to have from the outside, she would send me clippings of, football scores. And that whole football season just doesn't exist in my memory or my mind. So it's fun to think back to, that season, because it just doesn't exist for me.
That is funny. So, okay, so you're doing the 10-year service in the Marines, you're flying helicopters or traveling over the world. I saw like the videos on ESPN, like talking about how you're like just kicking footballs and kids like across the world. Like, you talking about what that experience was like and why that was special for you? Yeah.
So the story I think they mentioned on the ESPN segment was during my deployment. We were on a ship that kind of sailed across the Pacific through the Indian and up through the Suez Canal into the Med for a little bit, and then kind of reverse routing back to San Diego over a 7-month period. But one of our stops, or a few of our stops, we were able to get off. And I'd found a ball at one of the first stops, and was able to kick whenever we were off. We didn't have a lot of time off. I think in 7 months, we were off the boat for 12, 13 days. So not talking about significant periods of training by any means, but anytime we got off, I'd been working out plenty on the boat, but wanted to, just keep the legs somewhat fresh. And so I would bring this ball with me, while friends were hanging out, and they enjoyed it too, and to kind of throw the football around, but I would try and kick a few times. And so I think we were on, like a booze cruise, for lack of a better term, in Thailand during our port call. And I had the football and was kicking on one of the islands while buddies were having a beer. And then in Jordan, there was, I think this was the one mentioned in ESPN, it was on a Jordanian base, and, I was just kicking on this field that it was a soccer field for obvious reasons, not a football field, but, just kicking over the soccer goals. And the Jordanian soldier just walked by, and, he nodded to it and, hey, can I try, kind of thing. And yep, here you go for it. And he'd probably never seen a football, or maybe once or twice on TV, and, didn't speak each other's language, but could figure it out, and watched him kick it. And his buddies were standing off in the corner laughing at him. It was just a very cool cultural moment to get to experience that kind of thing, just again through the power of sport.
Yeah, that's a pretty awesome story. So all right, so then you finish up your 10 years or almost 11 years in the Marines. Like, what is your thought process? Like, why did you even want to go back to school? Or was, because the purpose of you going back to school wasn't to kick, right? It was you wanted to go to school, and then you're like, thought like, could I kick? So what was your process of why you wanted to go back to school? And then when was it like a real thought of like, wait a minute, why don't I try out again, or whatever?
Yeah. So probably 4 or 5 years before I got out, I was thinking long term, knowing when my contract was up and when I could step away. If you don't step away, you'd get new orders somewhere else, and then you'd be there for a few more years. And especially at the 10-year mark, you're kind of, do I stay in, or do I stay for the 20 years and get the pension and all that? So it's definitely a decision point, a natural inflection point in the decision process. And so I sat down with my wife, we talked about it. We said, it's been a great first professional chapter, but, there are other things I want to do. And so, could I get out and go with the airline? Sure, I could try that path. Didn't really jazz me, but that's one path. I could go out and get a normal civilian job, but I also understood that, yes, I had some unique experience in the military, some good leadership experience, but I didn't have a good tangible business background that I could really bring to a company. And so the GI being what it is, GI Bill being what it is, that's just such a good opportunity and such a great resource that it was too good to pass up. And so, I thought this makes sense. I'd seen some people some buddies do it before me, of, going back to school, getting an MBA, and then opening some doors after that. And then you have the military experience, you've got the MBA, so you've got some credibility on both sides of the spectrum. And so that became the natural progression, kind of what I was focused on. I was studying for the GMAT on the deployment, or studying in our like cafeteria wardroom at night, and, coming back and taking that. And so that was always kind of the goal. And when I realized that that was probably the way I was going to go, I thought, is the football thing even a possibility? I had to look into the rules on the eligibility, how it works. Like most people, I had no idea that my eligibility clock had started just by being a full-time student. So, I'd used 4 years, and normally that 5th year would have been burned that year following graduation, which is why most people don't have eligibility left. But because of the active duty service that fall after I graduated, that 5th year got paused. And so at that point, I was like, great, I've got 1 year left. Haven't seen anybody do this way, but reading the bylaws, talking to the NCAA eligibility folks, everything looked correct on paper. But again, I hadn't really seen anybody do this. And so kind of went in with this mindset and started prepping a little more seriously, especially coming back from the deployment. I was about 3 years out from going back to school. And so I knew I had to, if I was going to make a real run at the kicking thing, I had to make it a little more, a more dedication, for lack of a better term, for how I was going to go about doing this. And so, started going to the camps a little more aggressively, showing up to, high school kicking camps with 16, 17-year-olds is quite the experience. I walked up, got a wedding ring on. They're like, are you a grad are you a JUCO transfer? I was like, no, just, a graduate a long, long time ago. And so I kind of became that guy at those kicking camps, which is fun. But it gave me a chance to, one, get somebody to validate, yes, he's good enough to have an opportunity, but also kind of add the pressure. I can only add so much pressure kicking at a field by myself. So going to these camps, trying to simulate the best I can, a little bit of pressure, kicking against some of the best young recruits in the country, that kind of gave me the opportunity. And so it was at that point that I did make it more of a dedicated purpose. Was very fortunate to have great coaches in the San Diego area. It's kind of a hot spot for free agent guys to kick and train, especially in the off season. You got Nick Novak out there, John Carney, two greats that just happen to live in San Diego and were nice enough to allow me to come train with them. So everything seemed just to align on this path.
How did you even get in contact with the right people as because you said you're going to these camps and these coaches, like a lot of those camps are like invite only, or like, how are you putting your name in the hat, or did you have connections with the people that you knew?
Yeah. So for the camps, I reached out to the head of the camps on Twitter or email and just said, hey, here's my story. I know this is weird. Totally understandable if you don't want some late 20s, early 30 guys at your camp. I get it. But they were fantastic. The main coach I worked with was Chris Saylor, who does camps nationwide. Will Reichert was one of his top guys. He's been coaching guys many, many years. And he said, no, come on out. Love to have you. And he was a great asset. And he was able to, again, kind of vouch for me. He reached out to coaches, said, hey, we got this guy, very unique story. Worth taking a look. And so I was able to, develop relationships with him and a number of other folks over those 3 years kind of leading up to it that allowed me to try and find a way to make this work. But to your point, the goal was never kicking necessarily. It was a side goal, if you will. I made it very clear with my wife early on that the focal point is going back to school, the financial benefit of having an MBA and having a strong MBA. And so I made a very clear list in my mind of these are the schools I want to target. If football works out at these schools, great, but I want to prioritize the academics of these schools because that's why I'm going, especially with a family. We had a young daughter at the time. We ended up having a second child or son while I was here, but the decision making of why you're going to school is a little bit different with those things in mind. And so it was always go to school, best opportunity for life after school for myself professionally and the family. And if we can make this kicking thing work, great. And so there were a list of 3 or 4 schools that I thought fit well, very similar feels, and schools that I thought I might be able to convince the coach to take a chance. And UVA was one of them, and where it all worked out.
That's awesome. So the timeline was basically like you're doing those camps and all that training like in the summertime before the fall. Is that right?
Yeah. So it was, kind of 3 years leading up to it, and doing all those camps, as full-time Marine officer, pilot. And so there's certain delicate balance on, when can I train so I'm not constantly away from the family? When can I do these camps so it makes sense financially? It's certainly something I took very seriously. I don't like spending large sums of money to go travel to camps or for lessons if it's not going to be a tangible benefit. So my wife was extremely supportive from the get-go and throughout this all. So to have her in my corner was incredible. But, just balancing that full time, and then getting to about a year out from school was when I started reaching out to coaches, mainly the special teams analysts who were doing the actual recruiting for kickers. Started reaching out to them just on Twitter. I was shocked to see that's where the preponderance of the recruiting really happens, is the social media. And I had Twitter since I was an undergrad in 2010, so I had to make sure the Twitter was nice and professional when I jumped back on it for a while. But that was kind of where I first started finding my inroads with these coaches. And one of those coaches at UVA was Drew Meyer, the special teams analyst. And I threw out my story, said, hey, I would love to have the opportunity to join the team. He understood certainly it'd be a good story, but he and I both agreed that I wanted to make an impact. This was not about a good story. This was, yes, I want to fulfill this dream, but I want more than just a good story. I want to be on the field and fight for a job.
Heck yeah. All right. So then the opportunity they present you with, like that you chose at Virginia, is that opportunity like as a preferred walk-on? Is it a tryout? Like what was the agreement when you first decided to go to Virginia?
Yeah, so I think they were able to see, I don't want to speak for Drew, but I think he was able to see through videos and through camp highlights and, sending lessons that I was able to do with Nick Novak in San Diego to show kind of what I could do. And then he was able to kind of take that to Coach Elliott and say, we've got a guy, very different story, would bring something unique both in and out of the locker room. I think he could be useful. And so they kind of gave me the nod that I would have a potential spot coming into school 2 years ago. So that's where it kind of gets interesting is, plan to come to UVA, come to Darden for business school. And about a month or two before getting here, just figuring out the finer details, kind of had gotten the nod that I would have the opportunity to have a spot, essentially preferred walk-on, no tryout needed, with the team, coordinating with the business school on how that would work schedule-wise. Ran into the biggest roadblock, which was it wasn't going to work. Darden, the business school here, is very regimented in terms of the schedule. Every student takes the same courses essentially the full year, no exceptions. Everybody's in class at 8 a.m., out at 1 p.m., which was obviously going to interfere with the morning practices. And so we tried to find a way to get around that or, have access to recordings, and it wasn't able to work out. And so everything was set to go on track. And as I'm getting ready to move, find out that this dream is essentially dead in the water, which was a tough pill to swallow. Essentially, 14 years at that point of chasing this dream, had made everything work, had gotten into the school, had gotten the football coaches to buy off on this crazy idea. And at the last second, it was, an academic scheduling logistics issue that was keeping me from doing this. And so that's where the story probably should have ended. It didn't somehow come right after the season ended last year. So a few months after the tragedy with the team and 3 young men, I reached out a little bit later to Coach Meyer and said, hey, I've see if there's any ability to, do a waiver. And so kind of reached out to him just to feel that out. And they said, let's go for this. And so we spent essentially last January to July putting together a waiver to the NCAA, because at this point I had burned my last year of eligibility. I came off active duty. I did my first year of an MBA. That was my 5th year. And so we put up a waiver to the NCAA, essentially arguing that 5th year got burned due to circumstances outside of my control. It wasn't an injury. That's kind of the standard eligibility, extension. But, nothing of this situation was my fault. I had come here planning to plan to make it happen, and, got told due to the logistics issue, not knowing that beforehand at the last minute, that this wasn't going to happen. And so we got denied on the first waiver in about June, put together an appeal. The compliance team at UVA was tremendous. I can't say enough great things about all their hard work putting this together. And then I think it was late July. I'm sitting in a cubicle on a Zoom call at my internship in DC doing some consulting stuff, and got a call from the compliance department director saying the appeal got approved. We need you down here end of week to do concussion protocol. Camp starts next week. And from there, it was off to the races, and walked into my supervisor at the internship and said, hey, so funny story. I might need to end this internship a week early. Is that okay? They were fantastic about it. And my wife and I packed up our things from DC that we're staying at my parents' house for the summer and headed back down to Charlottesville, and fall camp started, and the chaos began.
That's interesting. I didn't realize how much like pushback you were getting during that whole process. It seems like most of the people I talk to on this podcast of like, they all have a crazy, like some type of story is like, it seems like a common theme that like right before their dream is realized, right before something, there's this huge pushback. And it'd be like, depending on your religious standpoint or just your perspective on things, like a lot of people say like it's kind of the universe either pushing back or just double, or God, or like just double checking.
Right.
Like, is this really what you want? Are you really willing to do everything for it? So it's kind of cool that your story kind of follows that same path. So what was I know you said it was like devastating. Your dream was like basically taken from you before it was given to you. What was your mental state at that point? Like, were you pretty distraught? Had you already like given up in your head, or did you have like a positive mindset of like, no, there's got to be a way for this to work?
Yeah, I'd probably be lying if I didn't say I was, distraught when I first got the news. I don't know if distraught's the right word, but, crushed. It hit hard. Again, this thing I'd been working towards so long, everything I'd done was right and on track, and then this stupid scheduling issue. And so, I remember going out after I got the news and went out to the field and was like, well, this is the last time kicking for quite a while until I just want to come out in 20 years and kick for fun. And so that was, I had a moment there, a little bit of a pity party for, a day or two. And then, you figure out, hey, if this is going to happen, we can look down the road. The idea of a waiver was in the back of my mind, but, waivers and the NCAA and all that was such a black box, and you don't see a lot of waivers, at least you didn't a year or two ago. And so I wasn't going to necessarily hold my breath and hold on to that for the next few months. And so, I kind of put it in a box and put it on the shelf, and, wanted to come into school focused on getting everything I can out of that experience, focused on, recruiting for an internship. And so I had other things on my mind that could kind of keep me preoccupied. I stayed in shape on the side as best I could with the scheduling with the business school, but it wasn't until, the football season kind of came to a close that I really reattacked that and said, okay, I think we have a case that we can go with. But again, if I'd be lying if I didn't say I had a day or two of a pity party, but I'm very lucky again to have an incredible support system at home. My wife, incredible, and being the eternal optimist of, let's try this. Why not? And I was just, at that point, I kind of shifted my mentality to, keep knocking on the door. People have told me no all along the way of this can't happen. Nobody's done this before. You've never played. No, and all the reasons why it can't happen. But, I just kept pushing with the why not. And the rule says I can do it up to the waiver point. And, part of me thought, is this waiver really worth it? And I got to make somebody do all this work with a very outside shot. And again, very lucky that the compliance team was willing to put a lot of time into putting a great package together, and then we got the no. And then I thought, yes, we should do the appeal, but is it really worth it? Like, what are the odds? And, you have the moments of self-doubt. And I realized the power of just not convincing yourself of no until you've asked that question. I think a lot of us will, whether it's this or any dream or opportunity, it's so easy to just say, it can't happen. It's never happened, or nobody's ever done this. And okay, I'll answer the question for myself without actually asking the question. And so, with that, and okay, let's make the NCAA say no with this appeal. And so we put it back up. And lo and behold, 4 days before it needed to happen, it all came together.
Yeah, I'm glad. At least you also have a good way to channel your frustration or your pity party. You can just get out of some footballs and feel a little better.
It's very much like golf. You just go out to the driving range and pull out the driver as much as you want.
um, okay, so with your MBA, you were there for a year. Did you fully graduate and get your MBA before you got your year of eligibility? What was the solution of like the scheduling, and how did your class schedule have to work in that year you played?
Yeah, so the MBA, I've got another week left, then finals, then graduation a few weeks later. So we'll finish up here shortly. But the way it could work the second year is because at that point it's elective courses. And
Oh,
so
okay.
I could essentially start all my classes at 11:45. And so, every morning practice starting around 6, we'd be on the field around 9, hit the showers at 11. I had 45 minutes to shower, throw on clothes, get over to school, and take off the football hat and put on the student hat. And 11:45, sitting in the seat, ready to go. And so that was really the only way it could work out. It wasn't necessarily I had to get a yes from the business school this time. It was just, hey, I was able to make it work, not interfering with my classes. I can be the full-time student without detracting from that. So, the former dean, who's now the dean of the Vanderbilt Business School, was a great proponent and advocate on my behalf. When it didn't happen my first year, he helped write a letter to the NCAA saying, hey, this was out of his control. This was our decision. Hopefully you do not punish him for that. And so Dartmouth was certainly supportive in that aspect of, wanting to make this happen without completely shuffling around their program.
Okay. So then you finally get it all resolved. That was a great moment of joy and relief and excitement. Was there any kind of like when you first get to the Marines, you have the shell shock of this whole new environment. Was there any bit of that when you're going into like a college football locker and training program? Or my other question is how difficult was the training after going through like Marine training? And then also, does the kicker even have to do the same conditioning and training that the rest of the team does?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, not necessarily shell shock, but certainly, you're walking in a locker room, you're like, oh, these guys are about to be blown away by why there's this old guy walking in my room, this guy I've never seen before. They were fantastic once they figured out who I was, which came a few hours later. But the conditioning, so kind of quarterbacks and kickers are kind of off to their side for the weight and strength training. For better or worse, I missed the main off season, so I wasn't doing the summer workouts, the spring ball with them, where you see a lot of the condition. I wish I had been. I enjoy that stuff. I enjoy being hazed in terms of tough workouts. I don't know what that says about me, but getting to fall camp, it's more you've got strength training, but other than that, you're not doing a ton of conditioning. It's more just ramping up for the season. So I would do the strength training with all the other kickers, punters, snappers, and the quarterbacks on our side, just different muscle groups. You don't need the kicker necessarily doing max cleans, focusing very much on the muscles we're using. But I think our specialist strength trainer certainly had his eyes wide when he heard my story and was like, well, this will be a good project for me to figure out how to get the most out of a 34-year-old trying to do this and get him through a season. So he was incredible in terms of making sure I didn't get worn down but stayed fresh throughout the season as best I could.
Okay. I mean, you said you didn't need to do much cleans, but I saw some highlights of some of your tackles, like in Miami. Dude. I don't know. I think you were getting in those strength workouts a little bit.
That was fun.
So yeah, kind of diving into that. Like, what would your first football game like? Like, what was the feeling and the adrenaline like when you're going onto the field, you're strapping the helmet on, and you're doing the kickoff, so you're kind of starting off the whole game, right? Like, were you more nervous, excited? Take us back to that moment.
Yeah, the whole day was incredible, and to get to do it, in Nissan Stadium in Nashville, I think it's, besides the Taylor Swift concert, I think it's the most packed that stadium's ever been on record. I would say 99% of those fans were Tennessee, as you'd expect. But even just the warm-ups, it's all new to me. Okay, what do we do for this warm-up? How much time do I have to do these kicks and really get ready? And so all that was just taking it all in. And I had a few moments before we started warming up of just take the moment in on the field, and then back down to business. But certainly coming out of the locker room, you run out, do your quick routine, and 30 seconds later, I'm kind of listening. Okay, did we win the toss? So, yep, we won the toss. We're kicking off. Here we go. Let's rip the Band-Aid off and start this football career. So it went from running out of the tunnel to having my first play in football at any level within about 2 minutes. I don't know if I was just locked in or used, training that I'd learned, flying and compartmentalizing, but I do remember, being pleasantly surprised on the level of nerves. There's certainly some anxiousness just staying on the sideline, getting ready to go, but, breaking the huddle and standing ready to kick off, you kind of describe it, you've got the stands up here, but you're so kind of laser focused on the ball and the guys in front of you that you're really not seeing or hearing all this. There are certain moments throughout that game where I remember, almost my hearing senses turn on, where I remember a specific song was playing. And so that was cool that whenever I hear that now, it takes me right back. But for the most part, it was pleasantly surprised that the nerves didn't really get to me in those moments. But I do remember breaking the huddle and for the first one, and the ref looks at me, he's like, hang on, we got about 15 seconds left for the TV crew. And I'm like, oh, let's come back in here and just, first time jitters or anxiousness to get this thing going and kick the ball.
That's awesome. That's gotta be exciting. So yeah, I just saw the clip of your the first kickoff against Tennessee. You looked like you had pretty good control. You looked pretty calm. I don't know if that was just the wisdom of the age, being older than the other guys, or it was your Marine training. I feel like kicking's a lot like golf, where it's kind of like your pre-swing thoughts that are most important. Were you have any specific training of what you're thinking about in your head? Or are you like Justin Tucker, where you're trying to aim it for like a tiny dibble on the ball? What are your pre-swing thoughts?
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right. I think the golf and a little bit to tennis, the sports psychology comes into effect, and I learned very quickly, and just the camps way long ago of I need to work on this and work this muscle as well. And there's certain things I could pull from the aviation side of compartmentalizing, but it's still a different muscle, and being able to kind of turn off the nerves or put it in a box and put it on a shelf, or focus in. I pulled little things from different books, and one of them was golf. Of you got your think box versus your play box, and the minute you take this step over here, there's no more thinking about what you're going to do. You're locked in, and so I think with kickoffs, it's going to be a little bit different than field goals in terms of what you're focused on or what you can kind of mentally prepare for, but it all kind of overlaps at some point, and so even little things like, okay, going through my head, what I'm saying to the guys, the play. I remember the first day of camp and going over the plays. Again, I had never played football before, so I'm writing down my book. I'm like, okay, that's the play. Okay, I'm going to say this twice and clap. Cool, that's how this works. Great. And so just going over little things like that, again, I had no idea other than watching it and seeing you guys do it a little bit on the side, how it actually went down on the field. So I certainly had my little cues for kickoffs. I always take my step, break the guys, take my steps. I do one, jump squat, just kind of get the legs flowing. People always wonder what I was doing, and I gotta go kick it as hard as I can. So I want to get especially if I've been staying on the sideline for a while, get the legs flowing real quick. And then, just focus on the basics, not trying to overhit it or anything like that. But, some were better than others. But I think it's a slightly different situation than field goals, but still the fundamentals are the same.
Yeah, I feel like kickoff's probably a little bit more like letting your adrenaline take over, struck the ball. Then for you, what I thought was incredible is you had 3 tackles, and I saw the highlight of the one in Miami. So after you kick the ball, or it's what like kicks in your head and you're just like, all right, now my adrenaline's pumped, let's go nail somebody. Like what did you have any training for any like tackling? Like how much, because you didn't play football much, so I imagine you
Yeah.
weren't doing many tackle drills in practice. What was your
No.
mindset? Tackling, I guess.
Yeah, so it's something I certainly, watching anybody who's watched the first episode of Friday Night Lights, the TV show, knows what a bad tackle looks like, and not one to paralyze myself being an idiot and not being able to tackle properly. So I made sure that, a coach had pulled me aside during fall camp and gave me the basics on tackling, just so if I was in that situation, I wouldn't hurt myself or hurt the other player or whatever it may be. But yeah, usually if I'm going running down the field, I think on the first one versus Tennessee, he ran it back a little bit. I got kind of juked, for lack of a better term, slipped on they had some new turf there, slipped on that turf and I like stuck out my leg as I'm falling off to the side. But on those tackles, I think the first tackle was against NC State is more of a guiding out of balance on a kickoff than a tackle. The Miami one I'm proud about. That's one I'll show my kids in a few years and be like, not bad, huh? But I think, if I'm having to tackle, it means I didn't really do my job in terms of putting it as a touchback in my mindset. So probably a little bit of anger at myself at that point. And like, well, you better go make up for it.
I was curious what the mindset of a kickoff kicker is for that. Is like, is the mindset of like, I'm just going to kick this a little forward so I can go tackle him? Or is it like, oh shit, he's coming. I'm the last line of defense.
Yeah. I will say I remember the first kickoff with Tennessee when he was running. I'm like, wow, this is so much quicker in person than it seems on TV. It's just, it's instantaneous. It's, reaction, plant yourself, make a move. If you're sitting on your heels, you're going to get juked and look like an idiot. And so, yeah, it's the goal is always, unless you're doing a pooch kick, back of the end zone. I did that better sometimes than others. But if they were running out, I didn't, part of me wanted to be the first one to the ball. I wasn't going to be, but, I wanted to get in there and get some tackles, but I also knew there's an area I should probably be on that back line, making sure that if holes do open up, I can at least slow them down for, if nothing else. But happy that I can slow them down permanently on one or two of them.
So for you, what would you consider your career highlight? Like your first opening kickoff against Tennessee, or that tackle against Miami, or something else?
Oh man, certainly the first kickoff against Tennessee was a surreal moment. The first kickoff at UVA, the next game, we had this ceremony for the three guys we lost. I was kicking off towards the student section, where 10 years prior, I'd been in that student section. So that was, a cool moment for me. But I think probably the career thing was not really even kicking related. It was the first game my kids got to come to, where the nap schedules worked out, and, looking up in the stands and seeing my daughter with the little headphones on to block the noise out in her little cheerleading outfit, that's a moment I'll never forget, and something that, most college players don't get that opportunity for obvious reasons, but the fact that I did get to have that opportunity, have them there, was absolutely surreal.
Yeah, it's gotta be pretty special. Not many kids get to watch their dad play college football.
Right.
So just a couple of quick questions that I was just curious about. That was pretty much your timeline I wanted to go through. But I mean, I'm sure in the locker room, everyone's always making fun of each other. I'm sure you got your fair share of old jokes in the locker room. Is there any really funny ones that stand out and you think take the crown over the other ones?
Certainly the nicknames were funny, grandpa, uncle, papa, whatever it may be, more it was just, they would say a term like, a Gen Z slang term. And I'd be like, wait, what? That'd make them like pause and explain. I'm like, I don't get it. Okay, we're just gonna move on with the situation. But there's certainly moments where they'll make a joke or say something. I'm like, you're 18. Got it. Got to remember that. But at the same time, it was so much fun being around them and being around that kind of energy. They were all so welcoming. Absolutely, 124 brothers of mine now. I think that's one of the things I miss most right now. going out and watching the spring game. And I love having some time back with the family. I definitely sacrificed some of that doing this last year. But, you know, getting to be in that locker room, people say that about the military and the Marine Corps too. You know, I don't miss the Marine Corps. I miss the Marines. Same thing. You know, I'm going to miss not, you know, playing in the games, but I'm also going to miss those guys just as much, if not more.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's pretty common theme amongst anybody that retires or has to quit playing.
Yeah.
Last video I meant to ask was, you're recruiting. I saw on ESPN that you're like recruiting video. You're like getting out of a helicopter or something. What? But the way you tell the story, it didn't sound like you needed to do much of a recruiting video. Did you make that video and then just like DM all the coaches on Twitter that video? Like, how did that go?
So it was kind of okay, how do I make myself stand out a little bit? I've got this unique kind of cool story with the military and the helicopter. How can we bring that in without, you know, making a focal point? Because at the end of the day, if I can't kick, I can't kick. They're not going to take me. And so it was, I was working with Nick Novak, and he had a guy that helped put together his videos. And so we were going to put together, you know, clips of me kicking and doing the full kickoffs, kicking left, right, middle. And so we thought, okay, we can throw something in there at the beginning. And so just to make it a little bit different. So we threw a few clips of, you know, me talking over and, you know, the helicopter and the flying. And it was funny. I had to ask the Marine Corps permission to just film on the flight line, because, you know, you're not really allowed to have cameras just out around the aircraft. So I had to, you know, request, hey, so weird story, looking to do this. Any issues? They're like, oh, we usually don't, you know, allow this, but yeah, go for it. And so I had my buddy come out. We snagged a gimbal and put my iPhone on, put on the flight suit and the gear, and walked out of the helicopter and saw me take off. And I just sent that to the video guy, and he put some snippets in, and somehow it all ended up on an ESPN segment, which is just wild.
Yeah. Yeah, your story has been great. I appreciate you coming on and telling it. I think talking to you, it's interesting. Like, I didn't realize, obviously, from the 5-minute clip on ESPN, they just kind of show you the glory, right? And they don't really talk about like all the denials and the NCAA troubles. So I appreciate you sharing all that. I think it's a great story of like,
absolutely,
just kind of pushing through, like everybody telling you no. And then even though you get frustrated and lose belief a little bit, just that, you know what, why not try? Like, why not? Like, let's just keep going. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen, right? And just keep pushing. So love your story. Appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to share, or where can the people find you?
No, I appreciate you, you know, having me on. This was fun to talk through again. It's been a while since I've told this story. I think people heard enough from me in the fall, but no, this has been awesome, and really appreciate the time.
Of course. All right. Well, that's all I got for you. So that's a show.